Hello, everybody. Um, I didn't go live yesterday. I was thinking about going live yesterday, but I just changed my mind about it. There was a lot going on yesterday, and there's a lot of things that need to be discussed. And Ruger made a good video today. I'm really liking that. Um, I would just simply add to that, certainly not taking away from it, but I'm adding to it. Um, yeah, the different elites of both the East and the West, they are very much rivals. They are rivals. But the setup of these elites is a bit different. The banks in the West are controlled by the Western satanic elites, the bankster gangsters, the banking elites. Whereas in the East, you have the CCP, who is never part of the Western setup or bloc. They control their central banks. The CCP is supreme in China. They hold all the gold, and so do the Russian political oligarchy class who runs Russia. They're very, very much different types of elites, but they ultimately are the same as far as what they both want, how evil each of them are, and them having their own designs on world domination. So while he did do a great video, I just wanted to add that to that. And I'm sure that the Western satanic banking elites who do want their own currency, which ultimately will be backed by nothing, so it'll be as worthless as the petrodollar is in actuality. Um, while the Eastern elites want the same. They want their own currency, but they want a resource-backed currency, whether that be a digital ruble or a digi-yuan. I'm sure it'll be a digi-yuan, being that China is the world superpower, the world hegemon. But the title of this video is Casus Belli, which means, you're reasoning to go to war. Well, speaking of that currency issue, I would say that alone is overreach enough. It would add to the overreach that would cause the people to carry out a Syrian-style internal conflict. I mean, come on now. I mean, look at where everything is going. And I'm just talking about the future as I created a hypothetical for it. Would that not count as significant enough overreach for the people to be pushed to their absolute limit? And I'm not even talking about how that also relates to why the West is going to be invaded, why it's going to be invaded. Because the Chi-Coms, the Russians, they have their own plans separate from that of the Western elites. And we already know this. I've already talked about this many times. We know that they have designs on the West for colonization reasons. So we know that the reasoning for the people to have a Syrian-style internal conflict is going to be massive overreach, false flags, and a whole slew of other things, such as economic and financial setbacks, the inability to feed themselves and to be able to have the fuel required to be able to travel to, whether that's to work or just to do normal everyday activities. So, overreach is going to be one of the many, many causes that pushes people to their limits, causing them to have an internal conflict. It's coming. It's coming. You know, they could try and go to this dollar all they want, but they did that in my hypothetical too, and guess what? Guess what? Only the regime areas continue to use the collapsed currency, while other areas went back to either using precious metals or to bartering. Bartering will be a big, big thing. And that'll happen during such a internal conflict. You're going to have people conducting trade with one another because they're not going to either want to use the currency or because they're going to hate it that much and they're not going to participate in it because they're going to be in a different factional area that has taken control in a different area. They're not going to want to be a part of that regime currency and system. Sorry, I had to take a drink there. So anyways, that is going to be a big part of this crumbling system of this nation. And you better believe it, too. You better believe that this nation isn't just going to, suck it up and go along with this new digital money. No, far from it. Far from it. Far from it. No, they're going to not want anything to do with it whatsoever at all, because there will be different factions. There will be. Now, I know people have, laughed at that Tim Pool guy, but that guy Tim Pool, whoever he is, he doesn't know anything about anything to do with no civil conflict. No, he hasn't researched the dynamics involved in such a thing as I have. And I mean, I'm talking about, how these factions will become divergent from current systems that either exist or exist in the shadows, meaning that they're not seen, they're unseen. They're unseen. It's naive, as I've said before, it's extremely naive to think that in a massive country this size, this populated, this well-equipped, that there's not people in the shadows, either nefarious people or people with good intentions that are plotting and scheming and planning their own emergent factional leadership corps that are going to take control in their respective areas. There could be many, many more factions even than what I was able to depict in my scenario. Why? Because, again, this nation is that vast, that big, that populated, and that well endowed, equipped with gear and arms, we'll just say. So it is extremely naive. And all the social conditions exist for this too now. All of the social conditions exist for this. For there to be such a split up. Even for the military to fracture. Even for that to fracture. and go with these different other factions. So that's a very, very real prospect. And people overlook that. But what they have done to our armed forces is going to cause it to disintegrate and melt away when the going gets tough. Because a lot of them, I'm talking about your guards and reservists, want nothing to do whatsoever at all with the current power structure. You have seen evidence of that. I've brought up evidence of it before. If you just want some quick evidence again, look what they've done in regards to the puppets, how they turn their backs on them. That's a tangible physical sign of their disdain and their distrust, their dislike, whatever you want to call it. There's more, but that's just what was able to be seen. No 21 gun salute, no, salute as far as standing there during the review. And no, they turned their backs on the puppets. They didn't give the puppet 21 gun salute. No. So that's a tangible physical sign of their disgust. So there's more, and I've gone over the more before, but that would take too much time. If you're interested, go watch some of my past live shows. I've got the Friday shows and the miscellaneous shows all in their own playlists. The playlists house everything. They even house the documentaries I've made, like the Syrian-style internal conflict one, which is going to play a big role in understanding what's coming. You think people are just going to take this on the chin? You think they're just going to be cool with the Ch1na bucks that I don't even want to say that puppet's name. I don't even want to say their name because it is just a total sham and a facade. This puppet and their bucks, they're whatever people are calling it. They're the digital money, okay? We'll just call it that. The digital money. People are not going to be cool with that. They're not going to take it on the chin. They're not going to be accepting of it. They're not. Maybe those in the globalist areas will be, but I don't see people being cool with that live in most parts of this land. I mean, unfortunately, and I really hate to bash certain areas. It's nothing against the good people that are still there, but these coastal areas in the west coast, these parts of the Northeast, and I'm originally from the Northeast, but they have totally, completely just ruined that place, and I could never live there ever again. And certain other areas. These globalist-oriented areas have been completely ruined and indoctrinated into just falling into these globalist ideologies and paradigms, and it's just disgusting to me. It's disgusting. Now, people there will be far more prone to being sucked into all of this than will be those who live in other areas that are more accustomed to having their traditional identities surviving still intact. Be that in places like Texas or the Midwest or other parts of the Southwest besides Texas or whatever, or the Southeast. Places where people have held on to their identity and are not going to give it up so easily will be the places that fracture away from the globalist areas in a future Syrian-style internal conflict. All the prerequisites exist for everything I put in that scenario to occur. Everything. Sure, maybe the factions will have different names, but the same ideologies have all been represented within that documentary. ultranationalism, secular humanism, which the ultranationalists were the secular humanists also, because they wanted to remake America into a God out of blood, in quotes, for that scenario. So the religious kooks were represented with the Mormon state. You had libertarians and Confederationists represented with the Union of Southwest Militias, but also the Maine Militia. You had different types of traditionalists, like conservative traditionalists, represented with the Army of the Southeast, the Northwest Conservative Army, which were divergent from what some would call Republicans, from that fake left-right paradigm. But they emerged from that and became traditionalists. You also had Texas and Florida go their own way. So then you had the globalist regime represented, and you had neutral areas, which were just large swathes of territory wherein the communities and cities and towns were just neutral and in it for themselves and wanted no part in the conflict apart from being in a defensive posture. Generally speaking, they were in a defensive posture, trying to resist any of the encroaching factions because they didn't want to be part of any factions. So they were generally in a defensive posture. So anyways, that was that. And I put everything conceivable into the very first video of that, especially, where the origin story was read to everybody. And a little bit of it in the beginning of the second video as well, which was the part about the coups that occurred. There were two big coups. Mainly the NSRF's coup, but also the Free American Army coup, where they tried to put the nation back under the Constitution, which failed because the globalist regime was barely able to hold on to power by like a fingernail. They almost lost. They were basically saved by a certain unit being willing to speed to the cap directly from Baltimore, because Baltimore is not very far away. They were able and willing to, speed down there to act as a mobile reinforcements to assist the regime, because the regime was on the ropes. They were about to lose, but, and I'm talking about the coup, during the coup. They were about to lose throughout the entire thing because, let's face it, they don't have enough people. They don't have enough people to enforce anything. So that's always been their issue. And it'll continue to be an issue for them. They cannot enforce their will everywhere upon everybody, which is why this place is going to turn into Syria. And it will. And it will. You will see it come to pass. They just don't have enough people. It's not enough. Not for a land this vast, this populated, this well equipped. It's just not going to happen. It's impossible. It's mathematically impossible, and I've shown everybody how. If you want to see that, again, go watch my past lives. I show this. I show a lot of this stuff in my past work. It's all there. I mean, in my past live shows and everything. Let me go check on the chat real quick before I keep talking about this. See who's all in here. Oh, hey, Jennifer. Hey, sweetheart. Let's see. Hey, Into the Fray. And B-Ren and King Tuna and yeah, King Tuna, they are. They've infiltrated and subverted us to an extreme, and I'm talking about the Chinese. They've got their tentacles and everything. They've subverted and sabotaged us every bit as much as the Western elites have for their, fabled Great Reset, which will never happen. It'll be a Chinese and Russian reset, if anything. There won't be no Great Reset because the West is going to be destroyed and its elites with it. They're not going to get away. They think they're going to be able to ride off into the sunset, but they're not going to escape it. That's part of their judgment, is to go down with the ship. They think they're going to get away, but the CCP could care less about them. The CCP doesn't give a rat's ass about the Western elites, nor do the Russians. The Russians sure don't care about them. The Western elites are actively trying to destroy Russia. That's why they're using Ukraine as a proxy. They put all these sanctions on them, which backfired. but, Russia's not Iraq. Russia's not any of these other small nations. Russia is a major developed power. They're the second most powerful nation on earth, militarily, with their resources, with their industrial base being second to China's as far as military production. Their stockpiles, their nuclear arsenal too. And when I say stockpiles, I'm talking about all the conventional weapons they have, like left over from the Soviet times and from modern times, from the 90s onwards. They didn't stop producing, even though the 90s were bad for them. They never stopped producing in the 90s either. So anyway, yeah, the East is going to annihilate the West. It's going to happen. And the Western elites are not going to get away with it. They think they are, but they're not. What's up? P.S. Jesus is coming soon, 777. Who else is in here? And A. Just the letter A. How you doing, A, if you're still here? Yeah, I hope everybody's doing all right. Well, anyways, the situation is such that, and again, Ruger did a really good job with this, explaining some of this. He said that the Western satanic elites who control that magazine with that cover, they show the East as being impregnable, and they are. At this point, they are. But remember, these Western elites are the direct rivals of the Eastern elites. And, they don't control the whole world. They just control the Western bloc. And them depicting these Eastern nations as impregnable shows a lot. It shows a lot what the mindset is as far as the West looking at the East. Because, a part of them knows deep down that the Western bloc is going to be destroyed. Part of them knows that. Do they still want their great reset in the West? Well, sure they do. Sure they do. But a part of them is having reservations about it. Or maybe, when I say a part of them, I guess you could, say in reality it's like a subset of them, of that same block, realizes that things are not going well for them. And it's not. And it's not. Their sanctions have backfired because Russia, again, is not Iraq. It's not Syria. Russia is Russia. Russia is a humongous power. And China is the world's superpower. And like Ruger said, they underpin the entire Eastern Bloc, where that wall was depicted. China is the Great Wall, protecting the whole of the East. Because China is the hegemon right now on the world stage. China is the most powerful nation the world has ever known. And they are going to take over the West, along with Russia and their other allies also. Despite the fact that Pakistan's having a hard time right now with their weather conditions, their flooding and whatever else, the fact remains Pakistan still has a formidable military for the relative to the size of their nation. It's in excess of 1 million personnel. They have a lot of tanks, a lot of aircraft, a lot of armored vehicles for a nation of their size. They also have a decently sized navy. You could say the same about Iran and North Korea. They all have formidable militaries for the relative to the size of their nation. Nowhere close to Russia or China, when you take reserves and paramilitary and everything into account. But for the size of their countries, they still have relatively large, formidable armed forces. So the kings of the East will be riding soon. Now, the West, I don't care what people see in current events. I don't care what anyone sees in current events. Whatever you see in current events isn't necessarily going to be the case as far as what actually happens. What happens in actuality is going to be far different than what you see predicted in current events, stories, news stories. What do I mean by that? I mean, these idiots, these Western satanic elites, or whoever controls the media, which they do control the media of the West, they can yap and yap and yap all day, every day, about what they're going to do to the common people. But that doesn't mean that the common people are going to sit there and take it. Now, you also have to understand, too, that a lot of what they say is being said for the sake of saying it, to be used as agitation, irritation, agitation, propaganda, or hype propaganda, or fear propaganda. They want to push fear, 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 hype, 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 hype. Agitation, agitation, irritation. That's what they do. They can talk about their digital dollars or whatever all day long. But that doesn't mean that this nation is going to exist in its current form whenever they introduce something like that. Like in my hypothetical, they had their digi-money, but their digi-money was a failure. It was a flop. There were power issues, and you need electricity to use digital anything. There were power failures throughout that whole entire internal conflict, including in the regime's areas. People could hardly use their digital money in those areas, and their digital money was worthless. It was as worthless as the money now that we have. So when today's money crashes, the digital money, you can't just ascribe value to it. It has to be backed up by something for it to have real value. It's like with these derivatives, and I've talked about derivatives forever. Go way back in my videos where I've said that the derivatives, if you count them as part of the debt, it's never, ever possible to pay that. Derivatives are your fake gold, your fake silver, your fake commodities. They're just paper certificates, everybody. That's all they are. Or digital certificates. Paper, digital, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. It's fake. It's not real. They're making up something. They're writing something on a piece of paper, saying it's worth something, but it's not. Like saying, oh, well, here's a certificate for, I don't know, 50 gold pieces or 50 ounces of gold. Here's a certificate for 50 ounces of gold. It's just paper that says that it's worth 50 ounces of gold, but it's just really a piece of paper. There's nothing backing it up. That's a derivative, folks, and I've talked about that for a long-ass time. I was on Gray Man's channel last night. Apparently, he's been telling everybody about it for a long-ass time himself, is what he said. So, you have people like me, like him, like others. We've all talked about derivatives for the longest time. Derivatives are part of the debt. Maybe they're separate. They're separate from the national debt, which is over twice as large. It's roughly about 3 times in actuality, compared to how far our actual GDP has dropped. But it's really about 3 times larger. But I'm just going to, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to say it's over 2. It's well over 2 times. So the GDP to debt ratio is awful. It's awful right now. It is awful. We can't pay that much. We can't even pay the interest on it really, much less taking care of these derivatives, which have just ballooned and mushroomed out of control, as well as like your unfunded liabilities, which are your pension programs, your Social Security. All of it has mushroomed out of control. We can't pay none of it. So how then are they just going to ascribe value to some digital trash and expect people to be able to use it, especially in situations where there's no power, where the country is ripping itself apart in an internal conflict because you have about 80% of the country that doesn't want to go along with it. Sure, you can agitate the populace or strike fear in the populace all day long by saying you're going to introduce this or do this to them or do that to them. But that doesn't mean that it's going to work. It doesn't mean it's going to work anything like what they're hoping it will. That's why I say that it's more or less just more hype and fear and agitation propaganda designed to get people to react and to call each other. Hence, a factional Syrian-style internal conflict. That's what this is about. The limited resources are going to play a role in that too. You better believe it. We're running out of fuel. We're running out of food. And a lot of that has been artificially done to create those conditions, be it through the foreign sabotage from the East, from the Eastern nations, or be it from internal sabotage from the global elitists and their stooges, like your Western satanic elites and their stooges. Some call them the global elites, even though they don't control the whole globe. They only really control the West, because there are two different sets of elites. There's the Eastern and Western. They're like rival mafia families, syndicates. Anyways, so you got a situation like that to where the country has been ripped into shreds already from an economic and financial standpoint. The banks even really don't hold that much gold. It's a lot of it has been sent overseas, and it is in the hands now of these Western elites that live overseas in Europe. But as I've said before, don't worry, that'll be taken from them when the Russians and Chinese invade. They're not going to be able to move all their gold out to some other location when the entire collective West is going to be overrun in a third world war by the Chinese and Russians. It is going to happen. Oh, and they're allies to boot. They're smaller allies like, Pakistan, North Korea, Iran, Syria, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, all of them. The nations in Africa that are basically now vassal puppet states of China from the Belt and Road loan schemes and everything else. They're going to have a humongous coalition, and it's going to crush the West. These Western elites are not going to be able to pay their way out. They're just going to get their gold jacked from them. They're going to get jacked, and they're going to be turned into slaves. That is their just punishment from God, because God ain't going to intervene to save them. Evil destroys evil, folks. It does. Unless evil sees other evil as a means to benefit them. But why is the CCP going to care about these Western elites when they've never cared about them? The CCP has only been about the CCP. The CCP is only about serving Xi Jinping. That is their little G God man in China. Xi Jinping is their little G God. So same with Russia. Why is Russia going to care about the people that have basically thrown everything they could at Russia in a feeble attempt to try to take them down? No. No, evil destroys evil, and the Russians don't give a rat's ass about the West either. As I've said before, Putin is a KGB man at his core. He has spied on the Western Economic Forum, and both of them have said some horrible things about each other, and it's more than what they've said about one another. It's also about what they've done towards one another. It's what they've done towards one another. Their actions. Actions always speak louder than words. But what I'm saying is when words and actions actually sync up, when they line up, yeah, you see what the truth is. And this time, the truth is in plain sight. So I highly suggest folks would actually go and look at my End of the West, not of world civilization. In that, I cover a lot of the differences between the Eastern and the Western elites, and why the West is going to be destroyed and the East is going to flourish. The East already is flourishing. Economic growth, bumper crops, food hoarding, humongous militaries with very, very modern weapons systems at their disposal, and lots of them, Industrialization at a scale never before seen. The East is flourishing while the West is dying. It's dying. And surely, certainly, like this digi-currency, things are being done to agitate the people of the West into open revolt, into some sort of open revolt. In the United States, it'll certainly be a Syrian-style factional conflict. People will be emerging from the shadows. They'll be emerging from the shadows with their own ideologies, ideas, and plans for the future of the land, for the country. Just like in my documentary, my hypothetical documentary, it'll be exactly like that. It'll be exactly like that. Like I said, there might be different names, of course, and different people running these different factions, of course, but it'll be much the same concepts. It already looks eerily similar to how that started. If you watch the Origins video, the very first video in the documentary, it already looks eerily similar to that. When the food stamps failed in that story, that was the first domino, really. I mean, not the very first. I mean, of course, you had overreach and false flags and all of this other stuff going on before that. But that was the first domino to drop that set off the actual civil unrest. Why did it set off the civil unrest? Because you had a lot of people that were disaffected, people that were unemployed, that were on public assistance and couldn't feed themselves. And when that domino dropped, it infuriated them, man. Oh, man, did that infuriate them. But the regime wanted to do what? They wanted to make examples because they were that evil of a faction. They wanted to make examples. They wanted an excuse to crush civilians for optics. For optics. They wanted people to see those examples. They had to make examples, folks, because they couldn't do it everywhere. They couldn't enforce their will everywhere. And that's obvious. And I made that obvious in the story, too. I made it understood. It's well understood that they didn't have the personnel and the manpower to deploy ubiquitously meaning everywhere at once across the nation, for a mart law situation. So they had to do certain things for optics to scare everybody else. That's how they operate, folks. They don't have the sizes of forces that people think they have. They just don't. They just don't. They're not that big. They're not all powerful. There's a depleted, hollow, woke military that is increasingly not that well equipped, not enough to do much of anything. Why? Because they've given away vast quantities of armaments, humongous, massive quantities of armaments, be that the systems themselves or all the ammo that goes with them, humongous amounts, to the black hole in Europe known as Ukraine. Or other black holes, where that's not the only one, of course, but that is chiefly the one where they have sunk a third of all our rocket artillery ammo for the HIMARS and M270, which is the MLRS. They have sunk a third of the ammo for that over there. A third. We've given just ginormous quantities, humongous quantities of shells for howitzer artillery. We've given them some of the platforms also. We cannot afford to be doing that. We cannot replace the things that we're just giving away willy-nilly to these black holes, especially the big one called Ukraine. We cannot replace them. China is refusing us the components we need to replace the even more complicated systems, as well as some of the raw materials that we depend on China for. You know, you have these M777 howitzers with titanium parts that get cracked. They crack when they could have just used steel for the same parts, but they wanted to make it overly complicated. I even put that in the documentary. I mentioned that in the Chicago battle. The military logistics by that point in the Chicago battle were almost non-existent. They were almost non-existent. They couldn't get the parts to fix these issues when they cropped up. So they had to cannibalize other systems until there were none left. That's a reality in war, especially internal conflicts, where you have no more military-industrial complex. Who the hell is going to go to work in the midst of a civil war? It's not going to be safe for people to go to work. They couldn't go to work anyway because all of the different factional areas would be cut off from one another. Areas that were once linked by rail and road infrastructure that would all be cut off. How are you going to bring in the raw materials and supplies from another side of the land when the whole land is embroiled in a conflict? That makes no sense. That would never happen. That would never happen. And in areas with factories and, entirely, you won't even have people going to work. It'll be too dangerous for people to go to work in the midst of an internal conflict. It would never happen. It would never happen. Even if they could go to work, they wouldn't be able to get the parts or the materials they need for the factories to be able to even produce anything. That's a reality of internal conflicts. So, what they're doing, back to my original point of all of this, what they're doing with this digi money, with all the agitation that they're doing, these provocations against both Russia and China, both of them, all the stuff you hear that are coming out, whether, there's a bunch of BS woven in with it, there's still that element of truth that they are indeed conducting provocations against China and Russia. There's an element of truth to that. Like the ships. Oh, and let me say this about those ships that sailed between the Taiwan Strait. There were 2 ships. It was just 2 ships. They didn't sail a whole carrier group this time. They sailed 2 rinky-dink, destroyers through the straits. Tiny ships. Like, China, please don't look at us. Don't look at us while we do this. We're going to do this for optics back home. Make people think we're still badass. You know what the names of those 2 destroyers were? Antietam and Chancellorsville. That was the name of the 2 little destroyers they sailed through the straits. These were tiny ships, folks. These weren't no, big, whole entire carrier group worth of ships, like the aircraft carrier and all the accompanying ships with it. No, it was just 2 little ships, 2 little destroyers by themselves. But the names of the ships is what was interesting. Chancellorsville and Antietam were 2 big Civil War battles in the First American Civil War. 2 big Civil War battles. Are they trying to say something there? It looks like they're trying to say something. Looks like they're trying to make a statement. Looks like they're telegraphing hidden messages. Maybe they're trying to say that they're trying to get one started. I don't know. It sure looks that way. It sure looks that way. Maybe that's a secret message to the other elites throughout the collective West to double down on all of their efforts in the West, because they don't control the whole world, they only control the West. That would only make sense to the Western elites everywhere, because the Chinese don't give a damn about no American Civil War battles. Most of them probably don't even know what those 2 battles were. The Russians don't care. So that was telegraphing a message to the other Western nations, especially the Europeans, but I guess you could say the Australians, the collective West. That was a message saying to double down on trying to incite your peoples to rage. Keep provoking your people. Double down on the fear and agitation and hype propaganda. Double down on your efforts to conduct overreach and false flags and whatever. Keep trying to, get the crock pot to where it's about to, basically erupt, to where it'll erupt. It's like a pressure cooker. So it's a pressure cooker. They're trying. I said crock pot. I meant to say pressure cooker. It's a pressure cooker, folks. They're doing all they can to get it to erupt. It is a concerted effort of sabotage, false flags, overreach on every level. This new currency, allegedly, which won't be everywhere, but the areas that will continue using it, these globalist areas, like in my Syrian-style internal conflict map, those globalist areas, the dark blue areas that still use the regime money, that's there to incite people to wrath. To wrath. How many people do you see that are cool with such a thing? Just right off the bat. How many people do you see that are happy with this? I bet it's not many. I bet it's not many. How many people do you think are just going to sit by the wayside and do nothing and just let this be another slap in the face to the collective population? You see, when I made that internal conflict scenario, each of the factions had their own form of propaganda. They each had their own form of propaganda, their own propaganda delivery to disseminate propaganda that would counter. It would be a direct counter to the globalist propaganda and each other's propaganda, because the factions even hated each other to a certain extent. At least the extreme ones, the more extreme evil ones, hated the moderate ones, and the moderate ones that were decent hated the extreme ones. They all had propaganda methods and dissemination. In the propaganda, the best propaganda was based on what? It was based on the truth. Well, the truth was that the globalists sure gave them a ton of ammunition for propaganda. Meaning that what the globalists were doing in their globalist areas, it allowed for these moderate factions, or these other extreme factions like the Mormon state and the secular humanists of the ultranationalist faction, the NSRF, and it allowed them to take a strong element of truth of what the globalists were up to and what they were doing, and it allowed them to weave that into their own narrative with their own ideologies and their own goals, and allowed them to create very formidable propaganda, because it was based on a lot of truth with only a tiny bit of lies woven into it. Lies, or their ideology. Just enough to where it would be a potent weapon, and it was able to influence the minds of the masses in their respective areas, within their respective areas. So that enabled these different factions to use their own narratives to create big forces, humongous forces, to turn the people on the regime, but also on each other, on the other factions, because the propaganda it became potent. All sides had their own. So I said that to say this. People who think that the propaganda coming from these globalists right now is the only propaganda, well, they're going to be sadly mistaken. Because in a Syrian-style internal conflict, the other factions are going to have their own potent forms. And I've showed in that internal Syrian-style conflict how they used everything from pirate radio stations to leaflets that were handed out in public venues, to spray painting and tagging their messages on highway overpasses, putting up posters even. They even had posters. The religious kooks of the Mormon state had sermons. They had whole sermons recorded and handed out on tracts. Similarly, the NSRF had memory sticks with their propaganda radio PSYOP programs recorded on memory sticks. Because computers could still be used in certain areas that had electricity. Sure, the internet was taken down by the globalist regime at the beginning, but if you had a memory stick, people were able to listen to those programs. You see, people got creative with their dissemination of propaganda in that conflict. Much of that, the Mormon state even used overseas internet accounts that were overseas that the globalist regime could not shut down. That's another thing. But people got creative. And you got to see a lot of that in Syria. These factions in Syria had their own propaganda. That's real. So I mimicked a lot of that with the way I showed how it would happen here too. And it would happen that way. It absolutely would. You'd have to be insane to think it wouldn't happen that way. You'd have to be a lunatic. People here would have their own propaganda to grow their factions, to manage their factions, to direct their factions insofar as directing their rage and their fighting spirit at other factions, even including the globalist regime faction. It would all of it would totally backfire on the globalist rogue regime. It would all backfire on them. You see, you got to understand, men make plans and God laughs. Well, the Western satanic elites want the people to cull one another, but it's not really going to work like that. It's going to work in a way that diminishes their own power as well. They're not going to have a great reset. That's never going to happen. That'll never happen. What'll be in its place will be a Syrian-style internal conflict, followed immediately by a Chinese and Russian invasion. The only reset that'll happen, and even Ruger said this in his video, the only reset that'll happen will be a Chinese and Russian reset. It'll be their reset, their version of a reset. It won't be a Western-dominated reset because the West will be destroyed. The West will be destroyed. There will be no Western Great Reset. The Western leaders will be even removed. They will be enslaved. They will become Xi Jinping's footstool. They will be humiliated. Just like all throughout the Bible, it shows us, it is written that these types of things happen to any nation or region or kingdom that receives its judgments. The leaders don't escape it. They never escape it. The leadership, the elites, all the way down to the lowest bum, the lowest beggar, the lowest vagabond. They're all judged. Everything in between, too. A Syrian-style issue here, a Syrian-style issue is part of our judgment as a nation, as a land, even including the whole rest of the collective West. They'll descend into civil unrest and then followed by internal turmoil at a level never before seen in Europe or in Australia. Eventually they'll go mad too. It'll happen, folks. The West is over. It's done for. And like Roy Potter said, and he was right when he said this, when the West has destroyed itself, the natural conclusion is that a stronger, more organized, more civilized land is going to come in and take over. The power vacuums that'll be created even before we get invaded by China and Russia, there will be power vacuums and they will be immense. They will be immense because the regime does not have the forces. The rogue globalist regime that runs this land does not have the numbers of forces that are a bare minimum requirement to occupy this land. So what can they do? At the very most, and this is the very most, they can occupy their globalist areas on the West Coast and the Northeast and their scattered islands of garrisons and cities that remain loyal to them. And that is it. That is it. That is all they can do. They don't have the personnel and the resources and the logistics to be able to occupy or project power across this entire nation. They're almost out of fuel. How the hell are they going to run their military vehicles without fuel? How are they going to feed their troops with less food and water? They're not going to be able to launch big offensives. They're not going to be able to, police the whole land. It's impossible. It's mathematically impossible in the terms of the logistics as much as it is for the terms of the personnel. The training of their personnel is extremely limited now compared to what it used to be. Our military is failing. It has failed, and it has collapsed into, it's been relegated to history. It's collapsed into the dustbin of history. It is relegated to the past, to a memory. It is a requiem of what it once was. It is a memory, a requiem. People still think in terms of the past. They're thinking about the past, U.S. military, not the current reality that it is. The current reality is that there's been a role reversal. Whereas the active duty used to be the cream of the crop, now the National Guard and Reserves are the cream of the crop. And the active duty has become a woke, hollow, thinned out, depleted joke. And I never thought I'd see the day where the part-time troops are more professional than the active duty forces. There's been a role reversal. There's been a role reversal. So our part-time troops that are part of our communities, they're drastically more professional than these woke military forces that are active duty, which used to be the cream of the crop. I used to be active duty. How do people think I feel about that? Yeah, I ain't too happy about it. What they did to my army, it's disgusting. It's been betrayed from within and from without. Well, the from without part's not a betrayal. It was a direct assault coming from the CCP infiltration. But that's neither here nor there. From within, it was betrayed. It was betrayed by traitors who were bribed and coerced and blackmailed into conducting CCP policies on our soil to castrate and neuter our armed forces and deplete the ranks and the equipment and the arms stockpiles and everything else. Now we're a joke. We're a complete joke. We cannot replace what we've lost. It's over. It's over. We've been cut off from China because they've cut us off in really insidious, sinister ways from components and resources we need to be able to create these overly complicated weapon systems that our armed forces relies on, or the parts required to repair the broken parts. Those weapons are not designed to be durable. They're designed to be overly complicated and break, to make the military-industrial complex a steady revenue stream, to make them more money for the parts required to fix the broken parts. When you have to sideline vehicles due to that, and you have no replacements, that's when you have to cannibalize vehicles to fix the sidelined vehicles. Sidelining means you have to let them sit there and they can't be used until they can be repaired. Oh, man. It just makes me just sigh in disbelief that this has happened to us. We used to be a superpower. Now we're nothing. Now we're nothing. Now we're a collection of just, we're a basket case of a nation. It's a basket case. It's a basket case in every category. Industries, economic and finance. Our whole economy is built on funny money, folks. It's not even real. Our economy is totally artificial at this point. It has shrunk. So when they show you the old GDP that we used to have of 20-something, that's the old GDP. The new GDP is like 12 trillion. 12 trillion. And China's GDP is about 19 trillion in real terms. They far surpassed us. They far surpassed us. They show a lot of old figures. Western sources show a lot of old figures in terms of like the economic and financial and some other categories, but mostly in the economic and financial domains. They show a lot of old categories of what we used to be, not what we are now. What we are now is a discombobulated basket case joke of a you know Ponzi scheme. I don't know what else to call it. It's all a bunch of fraud. It's fraud. Let me check the chat here. Hey, Aaron. Great to see you. I'm glad you made it. Tim Graff and who else is in here? Jeffrey, good to see you. Yeah. Our country's just built on total fraud at this point, and our military's a joke. It's completely been emasculated, been castrated, been neutered. So much so that even the part-timers are looking good about now compared to our active duty forces. It's so small too. It's such a small force. It's not big enough, and it's spread all around the world. It's not big enough to do any of its missions and do them well. And when it fractures and joins these different factions, it'll be even smaller, and the globalist regime will fall by the wayside like Bashar al-Assad, like he did in Syria. See, he lost ground quick in Syria. America's not special. The same thing's going to happen here too. The same exact thing's going to happen here. And I've showed exactly what that looks like, how and why. The hows and whys are irrefutable. Everything I've showed in regards to the internal conflict and why it'll be a Syrian-style situation, it's irrefutable. You're seeing parallels in real life that match the parallels of the origin story for the different factions. You're already seeing it. It's happening now. You see how these different factions are coming into being, like the Texas secessionist movement. You got Florida already doing its own thing, which could easily mean that there's things behind the scenes going on that the average people aren't seeing that indicate that they're going to go their own way. It's entirely possible. And if it's not them, it'll be another state. But Texas already has its own secessionist movement. There already are religious kooks and nut jobs. There already are secular humanist forces and ultranationalists and, traditionalists that are conservative leaning. They aren't Republicans, they're just conservative leaning, meaning their beliefs are traditionalists, they're conservatives. You already have libertarian people, swathes of them in this country, whole swathes of them. You have a little bit of everything that I shown in that documentary. Even the La Raza narco state, the cartels and the prison gangs and the thugs and just street gangs, all of them. There's a precedent for all of that. What's happening in Mexico now happened at the beginning of my scenario. Exactly. The food stamp thing happened at the beginning of my scenario, as I just got done saying a little while ago. There's precedents for everything you see that happened in that scenario. If you want a good indication of the future, go watch that entire thing from beginning to end. I tell you the news before it's news here. I'm giving you intel before the intel. Before it's intel. Now you can take it or you can leave it. But you would be wise if you heeded the warnings and you went and you learned what those things look like so that you can navigate them. Don't be that guy or gal that doesn't know what's going on when they had the opportunity to know what's going on by simply watching something, by seeing the concepts play out and what they look like, so that you can sidestep it, and be in a defensive posture because you know I'm avidly pro-self-defense. Anybody who speaks against self-defense is a liar and does the work of Satan. Because Satan wants Christians to be easily butchered. That's not God who wants that, folks. Even though God says it's precious when a saint dies in his eyes, don't misunderstand that. That means he is sad behind that. He feels sad behind that. He is saddened by that. God doesn't like to see his people slaughtered. That's a lie. Satan wants us slaughtered so that he can inherit the earth. Satan wants us butchered so that he can inherit the earth. That's what Satan really wants. He wants the world to himself. He wants to mimic and mock God by emasculating the Christian people, turning them into a bunch of cuckolds and sissies, because he wants them to be easy prey to evil. That's what Satan wants. That's a fact. That's the truth. You know, the Christian people used to be a hardy, tough people, going way back. Now, there's woke Christianity. I call it woke Christianity. It's created by the Jesuits who have a hand in it. But their whole entire objective has been to twist Bible scripture to make the Christians a weak people and easy for the slaughter. But even so, that is going to make some prophecy come to pass. It will make some prophecy come to pass. Like there will be people that are beheaded for their faith, and, you know, those are the people that can't defend themselves, and I get that, I understand that. But there will also be other people that get beheaded because they didn't defend themselves. And they could have. And they could have. Look, I get it. There's a lot of women that can't fight. And there's a lot of youngsters that can't fight. There's old people that can't fight. I get that. I get that. But any able-bodied man shouldn't be a cuckold or a sissy. If you're an able-bodied man, you better be able to fight back. That's all I'm saying. That's just a fact. Satan wants to butcher our people, and he wants it to be easy. He wants it to be easy. Yeshua Messiah was never against self-defense. People take the whole Bible out of context. If he was so against self-defense, his disciples would not be armed. He wouldn't have told them to sell their cloak and buy a sword. And no, it's not just for decoration. It's not just like that Joe Embriano guy says, it's not just for posterity's sake, just to hang it on the wall. No, that's for self-defense, folks. That's for self-defense. Revelation 21:8. Cowards, liars, the unbelieving, and the dogs, not literal dogs, but the people that are bestial and doggish, they will be cast into the outer darkness, into hell. You know what? You either believe in the whole Bible or you don't believe it at all. I'm getting sick of people that cherry pick verses. Yeshua Messiah flipped over tables and beat the money changers with the whip. You know, he had righteous anger. Get some. Get some. When you see evil, you shouldn't just be cool with evil happening. No, you should defend the innocent. You should defend yourself. And you should never be happy when they make his father's house a house of merchandise, like the modern day mega churches or the idolatrous Catholic Church. They've made his father's house a house of merchandise. Exactly what sent Yeshua into a righteous fit of anger, as it should have, you know. Joshua led armies in ancient Israel to slaughter the Amalekites, the Canaanites, the ites, all the ites, in a war of righteous self-defense. It was righteous. God had him do that because those same ites, all those peoples, the ites, wanted to slaughter the Hebrew people. Yes, they did. Yes, they did. So Joshua led his armies in a righteous war of self-defense against those peoples. Ch1na defended himself successfully by the hand of God with a simple farming tool. Some accounts say, other accounts say it was a spear, but either way, he fought off and killed off in self-defense 600 Philistine aggressors with either a farming tool or a spear. That was done by the hand of God. God doesn't contradict himself, folks. He never changes. He was the same when he led them to do those feats, or when he guided David's stone from his sling into Goliath's head. God was the same then. He was the same when the disciples were armed, and Yeshua Messiah said to sell your cloak and buy a sword. You don't think the disciples had to defend themselves on those roads, those ancient roads, whether they were Roman roads or the Silk Road, when someone on their way to India that far to go preach the gospel? You don't think they had to defend themselves against bandits and wild animals? You're crazy. You're crazy. You're wrong, too. God was the same then. He was the same now. And he's going to be the same when Yeshua Messiah returns and kicks evil square in the ass and kills all the evil with the sword of righteousness comes out of his mouth. It slaughters them to where the blood runs as high as a horse's bridle. He is coming back to kick ass and take names in the book of life and his other books. He was the same then, he's the same now, and he's going to be the same when he comes back to destroy evil and throw the false prophet and Antichrist, the beast. He's going to throw them alive into the lake of fire forever. He was the same then, he's the same now, and he's going to be the same then. That's the God I worship. I worship a mighty warrior king. That's the Yeshua I worship. I don't worship the fake Yeshua that was concocted by the Jesuits and other evil satanic forces. I don't worship that one. The little weakling, hippie, limp-wristed Yeshua that they got by twisting scriptures into something that they were never intended to be. I don't worship that Yeshua. I worship the real one, the mighty warrior king. Yes, he came as a sacrifice the first time, but that was so he could be a sacrifice. He is a mighty warrior king, and I won't hear anything else of it. Thank you, Aaron. Amen. Amen. Yeah, Jeffrey, they're godless heathens that they've twisted the Bible into something it was never meant to be. Televangelists, yeah, angry Scandinavian Tommy. Good to see you, Tommy. Yeah, they've totally perverted the scriptures. They've twisted it into something it was never made to be. They've created a fake, like, doppelganger of Yeshua, this limp-wristed, weak, frail little hippie Barney the dinosaur Yeshua, and that's not the way he is. He is stern, he is firm, he is powerful and mighty. Yes, he is all good too. But the way I see God's love is a firm love, because God will judge you. If you're doing evil, he will judge you. And eventually, if you stay evil, he will destroy you. But that's righteous. That is righteous. The God I worship is a firm, paternal sort of God. He's not this weak, limp-wristed, hippie, Barney the dinosaur type of God. That's not the God I worship. Yeah, he ain't coming back as Mr. Rogers. Amen, Aaron. Amen. Well said. Very well said. You know, Mr. Rogers, I believe back then, because that was old TV, like way back then. I believe Mr. Rogers, legitimately was probably a decent human being. I really do. I mean, I've never seen him do anything or heard of him do anything that was wrong or evil. You know, I believe he really cared back then, but even so, no, God ain't coming back as no Mr. Rogers, no. In the form of Yeshua, his son, he is not coming back. Yeshua is the Word made flesh. He came to live among us, and he was a sacrifice for all the sins of man. The first time. But the way he's coming back as a mighty warrior king, that's his true form. He is a mighty, powerful king. He's not some limp-wristed weakling that wants you to bend over and get kicked in the ass by evil. That's not the God I worship. That's wrong. Yeah, just man, when the Western elites go to China, they're going to be humiliated. They're going to be working in slave camps with the we to the gers, or they're going to be building Xi Jinping temples or whatever. They will hold no cards when the West is destroyed. Like I said, the Chinese will be like, nah, playa, you're going to give us all your gold and wealth, and you're going to be our slaves too. And you're going to be our slaves too. They will be humbled. That's part of the judgment of those people. They're not getting away with a damn thing. The kings of the nations and regions that get judgment throughout the Bible, they get judged with everybody else too. They're not getting away with shit. No, I just got to be real about that. They're not getting away with nothing. These Western satanic elites, they're not getting away with nothing. They will be humiliated by other evil, by the CCP, by the Russians, by the different Islamists of the Middle East. They're going to be humiliated by these Eastern elites, by the different Eastern elites. Exactly, Priscilla. He ain't coming back to give hugs. He's coming back to kick ass and take names. And everybody better be right when he comes back. If you're still alive to see him come back, that's when the rapture will happen. That's when everybody will be changed in the twinkling of an eye. Those who stayed true to him will be. Those who stayed true to him will be changed in the twinkling of an eye when he returns at Armageddon, if people live that long. Otherwise, a lot of people won't even make it to see his return. He comes back one time, not two times. He comes back one time. Yeah, Mary, that's the truth. Anyone who has inhumane intent to harm the innocent, they are not saints. Absolutely. It's called murder. There is a big difference between self-defense and murder. Big difference between self-defense and murder. Self-defense is justified. And that's in the Bible too, folks. There's even a passage in the Bible about killing intruders that barge into your house at night. That is justified. Doesn't matter who they are. Doesn't matter what sort of false authority they claim or whatever. Man is not an authority above God. There are no kings but King Yeshua. None. No man, no human has a higher authority over you and your life or your property than God does in yourself. So you and God are the as far as your property, your free will that God gave you and God himself above you are the only ones that have a higher claim over your life and property. No other man does. No other man does. Yep. Yes, God is the ultimate authority on everything. But I'm saying that God gave you free will, and you better choose to defend yourself and your property and the innocent with your God-given free will. Because what the free will he gave you is what's going to determine whether you go to heaven or hell. What did you do with your free will? What did you do with it? You know, people can talk the talk, but will they walk the walk? Yes, sir, angry Scandinavian. And that means even if you have to, fight off hordes of evil aggressors, that's what that means too. It means a whole host of different things, depending on your circumstances and situation. Yes, sir. I'm glad to see everybody here. This is a great live, really good live so far. Very happy to see everybody here. I guess I went live at a good time. I've been going for a while though, so let me see if everybody's. Yeah, Jeffrey. I like how you said that. That's funny. And you're right, Tommy. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Definitely right. You and Jeffrey have said it right. And you too, Aaron. I'm so happy you're here, Aaron. You definitely had a good contribution to these chats. Oh, sorry, I dropped the phone. Yeah, I love seeing you here, Aaron. Yeah, Yah is mighty. He ain't no little pansy. He doesn't want you to be a pansy. He wants you to be mighty too. He wants you to be like him, to stand against evil. When evil aggresses upon you, he wants you to stand against it, fend it off, crush it if it comes and attacks you. Crush it. I would love nothing more than to see all the evil in the world destroyed. I would love to see it. And it's not like we should just stand by idly. If we're attacked by any sort of evil forces, and I mean if they attack you, they come against you, crush it. And ask God's help in doing so. Ask his help in doing so. Pray to God, too, that he will help you crush it like Ch1na crushed 600 Philistines that attacked him in the lentil field. I've had dreams where I've withstood about 40 Ch1na troops on our soil, or Russians. I've had dreams like that. They got me eventually, but just for one man to be able to withstand 40 of them, to take on 40, that's a feat of God. Sure, it's not as great as Ch1na's feat of 600, but you know what? I'll take it. I'll take it. I'll take it. If I'm attacked by 40 evildoers and I can best all of them, even if it's a dream and that's an indication of the future, if I can defeat 40, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that. I'm talking about 40 foreign troops aggressing upon me. I will be happy with that. At one time, yeah, I'll take it. I'll take it. That's good enough for me. Because you know what that means? That means they won't be around to aggress on other innocent people. That's what that means. Every evildoer that aggresses upon you, that you remove from this world, that you eliminate from this world, that's one less that's going to hurt a youngster or an old person or some woman somewhere. That's one less of them around to do that. That's doing God's work, believe it or not. Crushing evil is always doing God's work. It's righteous. Yes, be a real warrior in his army, Tommy, like you said, yeah. All right, everybody. Hard luck. Good to see you, Mary, and Jen, my dear, and Aaron. It's great to have you as always. Mary, Priscilla, Mary W, Mary Flasha. You have a German last name, Mary Flasha. The anytime you see an E at the end of a word in German, it's like an ah sound. I say it that way because that's a German last name, like hardcore. Like my last name used to have an E on the end of it. It was Kara. It was pronounced Kara, which means like a wheelbarrow or a jalopy or a work cart. That's what my last name originally meant in German. But they took a lot of German names were Americanized back in the day because of the World War I and World War II. There was a stigma attached, so they Americanized them. They would take like the E's off the end of them, so it would sound more American. The German spelling of my last name, versus the English is different because the German car is with a K, the English car is with a C. Yeah, very different. Very different. But English and German have a lot of similarities. German's a very easy language to learn if you're already an English speaker. They're in the same language family. German was very easy for me to learn. Yeah, well, that's cool, Mary. But yeah, your last name is German, like like I've never seen. Like that's why I always pronounce it in the German way. I pronounce it Mary Flasche because that's how it's pronounced. But yeah, my last name is too Mary. They just Americanized it a bit. But yeah, it was good to see everybody. I'm glad everybody came. Bernard, yeah, yeah. You too, Jeffrey. Yeah, Bernard. Yeah, Bernard. That's a German last name. But yeah, I'll see you all later. This was a great live. Thank you, everybody, and for participating and coming. And this was a very good one. Thank you.